to everyone, and welcome to the high-value webinar on climate change impacts in the Euphrates and Tigris River Basin, based on the European Union Cascades report. Hydropolitics Academy or Hydropolitics Association is delighted to host of this high-value webinar. We will discuss the Cascade report, key findings and recommendations with the four valuable experts: Andre Müller from Adaptation, Dr. Martina Klimes from Stockholm International Water Institute, Süha Umar, former ambassador of Turkey in Jordan, and Dr. Hassan Janabi, former minister of justice of Iraq. First of all, in the first session, we will listen to Andre Müller's presentation about key findings and recommendations of the Cascade report. After that, in the second session, we will listen to contributors, Dr. Martina Klimes, Süha Umar, and Dr. Hassan Janabi. In the last session, we will discuss the report's key findings and all the contributions about the webinar with questions of the participants. You can share your questions via chat area of the Zoom software, or you can raise your hands in the QA session to ask your questions directly to the discussants. If you want to ask your questions, you can write the discussant's name you want to ask to. I want to note that. I want to give the floor, first of all, Mr. Gülşen Yıldız, head of the Hydropolitics Academy. If it's suitable for you, Mr. Yıldız, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kandemir. Distinguished guests, speakers, and participants.
Hello, I'm fine.
Welcome to the high-level webinar on climate change-related water problems in the Euphrates and Tigris River Basin. This is the fifth of its kind. At the Hydropolitics Academy of Ankara, Turkey, organized since the beginning of last year. First of all, I would like to thank to our distinguished speaker, Andre Müller, contributors, Dr. Martina, His Excellency Dr. Janabi, and His Excellency Mr. Umar, and also all of you participating to this event. Today, we will be analyzing the effect of climate change on the Euphrates and Tigris River Basin that has been the cradle of many civilizations through the history of mankind. From time to time, we hear this question: is it likely that the Euphrates and Tigris river system will dry up? Well, I don't know what you think, but I think that my answer will be certainly not. But it seems certain that within the next 20 years, that the water usage and the demand by the riparian states will exceed the supplies. Increased level of pollution will make the management of the limited supply of Euphrates and Tigris water even more difficult for the nations that rely on it. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this important gathering of experts on water resources, management, and diplomacy, allow me to highlight some of the topics that we see important at this time of rethinking the steps ahead in our region. We, at the Hydropolitics Academy, believe that the efforts of our bilateral states of the transboundary water resources of our region can only be intensified and given momentum by the activities of the scientific community and the organizations that represent the civil interest of our nation. Our effort in this regard should not be discouraged by the fact that our region has a very dynamic structure in terms of political and social relations that has occasionally led to conflicts between riparian states. Instead, these facts must make us more willing to make the best use of interests of the next generation of our region. As civil society organizations, we need to have to create shared vision, shared goal, and the unity of effort to tackle the problems related with transboundary water, climate change adaptation in the region. I wish you luck, our dear speakers, contributors, and participants in taking benefit of this opportunity and make contributions that may lead to creation of frameworks for a better future in our region. Welcome again and best wishes for a successful webinar.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yıldız. And in the first session, I said before, we will listen Andre Müller's presentation. Before the presentation, I want to introduce him. Andre Müller has Master of Science degree in Water Science and Governance. He works as a consultant at Adaptation, specializing in water resources management. He sees an urgent need to drastically lower the growing pressures from human actions and a warming climate on the water resources and the ecosystems that provide them. Thus, he dedicates his work to projects that spearhead a sustainable climate-resilient water management approach. And if it's suitable for you, dear Müller, the floor is yours to share your presentation. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, we're working now.
Perfect. So, hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to present to you our study on climate change and water in the Euphrates-Tigris Basin. Working at the Berlin-based think tank Adelphi, I've been the lead author of the study, and I have with me my colleagues Adrian Detkes and Benjamin Pohl, who are both co-authors of the report as well. I'd like to warm-heartedly thank Dursun Yildiz and colleagues from the Hydropolitics Association for inviting us and giving us the chance to present this study and stimulate discussion around it. A big thanks also goes to our co-authors from CDOP, Eckhard Wirtz, who is here, I just saw, and from Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, as well as to all contributors involved in the interviews and workshops, which build the backbone of the study. What I would like to do today is to present the key findings and recommendations and bring us all on the same page and provide entry points for a stimulating discussion. The agenda is as follows. I will say a few words about cascades and the case study, then talk about climate change and water in the Euphrates-Tigris Basin, then jump into a vulnerability and risk assessment, and finally talk about adaptation. Where does the basin stand and what would be smart to happen in the future? Cascades. What is the problem Cascades, the EU funded project in which the study evolved, is trying to tackle? We live in an increasingly connected world. Like here in the example, heat waves in Russia can have economic, political, and social repercussions for the UK. We call these kinds of risks systematic risks because they can affect the entire global system. Cascades seeks to understand these systematic risks caused by the impacts of climate change on trade, investments, sustainable development, and security in the European neighborhood, with a view to improving cooperation between the EU and countries surrounding it. It examines several case studies with different thematic foci to derive recommendations for EU policy. The Euphrates-Tigris Basin is one of them. The goal of the study is to explore the future impacts of climate change on water resources in the basin and the ensuing socioeconomic and political challenges, taking a transboundary perspective. Our study focuses on three different risk areas: livelihoods and food security, political stability and violence, and interstate conflict and cooperation. We combined open access data, a literature review, expert interviews, and drew on two workshops. Scenario building exercises were the main method used to assess the vulnerability of the basin's water resources to climate change and to derive recommendations for adaptation measures that could mitigate future climate risks and to seize opportunities for increased cooperation and resilience building. To explore the causalities of the three risks, we consider a wide range of socioeconomic, institutional, and political factors that shape the basin's vulnerability. We call them vulnerability factors in this presentation and in this study. It is quite important to understand that the above three risks would be the result of complex interactions among many vulnerability factors. Let's make this clearer. Here you see a risk cascade or an impact chain. A drought reducing water availability can result in harvest failures and the breakdown of livelihoods and eventually cause conflict. It can. But those vulnerability factors, like an unresponsive government, along the chain influence how effectively a drought can trigger these knock-on effects. So, why are we talking about climate change and water in the Euphrates-Tigris Basin? Water is the primary medium through which climate change will manifest itself. Water insecurity increases the vulnerability to climate change, and in some parts of the basin, water stress is already very high, as indicated in the figure on the left. The likelihood of climate risk to happen, like those we focus on, is therefore also higher. As indicated in the figure on the right, supply will continue to decline due to growing demands, while pollution is further reducing water availability. Water challenges are complicated in the basin, as Syria and Iraq are dependent on the Euphrates and Tigris for a significant share of their water use, above 60%. The rivers are or form their lifeline. The basin countries will be among the most strongly impacted through climate change. Climate change will be a strong driver, therefore, of future increases in water stress in the region. You can see on the two maps showing predicted changes to rainfall and river discharge over the next 30 years in two different scenarios, the right being more pessimistic. In view of the water challenges the basin is already facing, it is important to comprehend the magnitude of some of those predicted impacts. For example, a cut to river flows by up to 30%. This map shows how climate change affect hydrological parameters and water security. Key hydrological changes include reduced river flows, saltwater intrusion into rivers, extremes including droughts, floods, and heat waves, and decreases in soil moisture. All of these will affect water availability. In the following minutes, I will talk about how climate impacts may interact with the three risk areas we suggested or we focused on in our study. As shown here in the graph, a substantial part of agriculture is already affected by water stress and drought risk. This is problematic, importantly, because around 30% of the workforce in the basin is employed in agriculture. This risk cascade is a continuation of the different climate impacts on water I just showed a minute ago. So by further straining water availability and making it more variable, climate change may reduce agricultural productivity and make farmers lose their livelihoods and drive them into poverty and food insecurity, while simultaneously compounding drinking water supply and sanitation, increasing the spread of waterborne diseases and comprising human well-being. The main point here is that whether these risks come to manifest, as I explained before, and with what intensity depends on various vulnerability factors interacting with this risk cascade. One key one is natural resource management, or water resource management, to narrow it down. Take the example of the Syrian drought in 2007 to 2011 and the resulting civil war. Scholars claim that decades of water mismanagement may have been much more important than the actual effects of the drought on water security itself. Our workshop participants ranked natural resource management the most important vulnerability factor. Other important vulnerability factors in this risk cascade include both the government's long-term support for farmer or herders, for example, preceding the drought, and the emergency response to the drought itself. Our second risk cascade. In our study, we focus on different ways climate-related water risks can lead to political instability and violence. These include acts of using water as a weapon, urban to rural migration, and civil unrest and protests. All of these occur in the basin. For example, in 2017, the basin ranked 5th globally among transboundary basins experiencing acts of water weaponization. There are concerns that climate-related water risks will increase these different forms of political instability and violence. I'm going through the following two risks a little faster than the first one. As a consequence of food shortages and disrupted rural livelihoods, farmers may be displaced and migrate to cities. There, migrants could increase social and economic pressure, for example, on housing, water services, and the employment market. Again, various vulnerability factors play a role here. If people abandon their homes, depends eventually on their mobility as one factor to name here. If the pressures from rapid urban population growth can be mitigated or end in chaos, depends very much on how well governments are prepared for such a scenario. If they are, they might even gain from such changing demographics, as indicated here by the encircled cross. In the same now overcrowded urban areas, please imagine, discontent and civic anger with the government may result and eventually cause people to go to the streets and protest and so on, is strongly influenced by the economic situation and the state-citizen relationship. Have people been frustrated about unemployment and chronic economic depression for a long time? Do they have lost trust in the corrupt political elite and do blame the government for the miserable situation they find themselves in? These are some factors that matter here. Let's move to our last risk cascade, and the third risk area in our study. The basin has seen periods of cooperation and tensions over water in recent decades, as just mentioned by This, compared to other transboundary basins, formal bilateral cooperation is limited and regional cooperation is almost non-existent. Low institutional development may also be a reason why the basin is considered to be at relatively high risk of transboundary conflict. Climate change, to just give a few examples, may weaken existing cross-border governance structures and institutions. Simultaneously, there are concerns that growing water demands paired with less availability could prompt upstream states to hold back more water. Both outcomes could trigger cross-border tensions, especially during droughts when water levels fall abruptly, threatening downstream water supply. Some experts deem a business-as-usual scenario to be one of the greatest risks, as it would slowly aggravate the water situation in Iraq and Syria, which have to accept what is left coming down the rivers. In a more positive scenario, events like droughts may also prompt the states to deepen cooperation, as the basin witnessed in the past. Oh, I forgot one small part to say. In our study, we focused on three vulnerability factors in particular that concern this risk cascade. Economic trade and dependency is one, the importance of which is often cited for Iraqi and Turkish relations. The domestic political situation is another one. For example, will downstream economies diversify and become less dependent on water-intensive agriculture, decreasing their vulnerability to climate change? Will downstream Syria and Iraq be capable at all to challenge Turkey's and Iran's upstream development in ways that could lead to conflict? Lastly, will the international community come in to mediate if conflicts arise or offer assistance to much needed transboundary cooperation, the demand for which is growing with climate change. Again, there are of course many more factors shaping this risk cascade, but these seemed or appeared as three very important ones in our research. Let's move to the part of adaptation. Based on the risk analysis, we looked at 4 different intervention areas and assessed how well basin states are prepared for future challenges before we then developed recommendations for adaptation actions. Given the limited time in this presentation, I will give a brief overview of measures in each of the 4 intervention areas and throw up a few pointers and questions that hopefully will spark discussion later on. But first, let's start with an overview on where the basin stands in terms of climate adaptation. The adaptive capacity to cope with climate change varies across the basin, the countries, being highest in Turkey and lowest in Syria. Despite some positive signs, the national institutions and policies dealing with water and climate adaptation are currently insufficient, with gaps being even greater in cross-border cooperation. The key issue is that various economic, political, security, and institutional challenges undermine policy change and improvements in water management. Barriers here range from corruption to lack of finances and a broken state-citizen relationship, creating a vicious cycle that is hard to break. Our study tries to show that, in fact, the context is becoming even less supportive, for example, due to shrinking state budgets. As a consequence, the possibilities for mitigating growing water-related climate risk or taking advantage of the opportunities climate change could entail are diminishing. Let's jump into a brief overview of measures, followed by a few pointers and questions that speak to what international players and donors, including the EU, can do in particular. Reform national water management in water-intensive sector was our first headline for recommendations. Here, measures stretch from demand management, extending non-conventional supply alternatives and sewage treatment, to repairing critical infrastructures. Many of them appear already in other studies and reports and are partly taken up in national water strategies and policies. There are multiple promising signs, for example, environmental NGOs promoting the use of drip irrigation and other water-saving techniques in some places. But measures may be still piecemeal, and the critical question is how they can be brought to scale to match up with the gravity of future water challenges. Another important question is who's going to finance these water sector reforms. For example, in Iraq and Syria, measures to rehabilitate the most important hydro infrastructures require funds that exceed the budgets of the respective water ministries manifold. Adapting to future impacts of climate change will increase costs. External help is thus certainly required at an unprecedented scale. The second intervention area, devise adaptation options that foster water security. Managing water resources sustainably is an important element of robust climate adaptation, but it's not done with that. Climate resilience measures need integration in water management as well. For example, to carry out risk assessments for infrastructure that consider climate change impacts. At the same time, sustainable water management concepts need to be anchored in adaptation efforts, like in national adaptation strategies. The countries are undertaking those adaptation efforts, yet to achieve climate resilience requires much more action. Obvious levers are to tie development assistance to requirements of climate resilience and sustainable water management, as well as to help the basin states to tap into adaptation finance to shoulder water reforms and adaptation efforts. The third intervention area, improve conditions that enable advancements in institutionalized cross-border water cooperation. Climate change, as I mentioned before, requires more cross-border water cooperation, while it may weaken existing cross-border arrangements and institutions. Many experts agree that a formal cross-border agreement with basic mechanisms on sharing waters and dealing with climate risks is needed. So are more cross-border data and collection, and so is more cross-border data collection and exchange, or the establishment of a cross-border platform for cooperation. However, chances for permanent institutionalized cooperation to advance in the future are low. Therefore, a question possibly circulating in many minds participating here is how transboundary water cooperation can be given a new spin. That could be to find new common areas of interest beyond focusing on solving water problems, like deeper economic integration or joint protection of infrastructures. Also, we had some talk in the workshops about if there can be any significant progress on transboundary water cooperation without including Iran, and how the country could be brought to the table. Moreover, and assuming business as usual, what are measures Turkey and Iran would have left at their disposal to minimize downstream impacts without necessarily compromising on their own water developments? These could include carrying out environmental impact assessments for infrastructure projects or introducing environmental flows. And how can these measures, these minimum risk or minimum trade-off measures, be supported by the international community? A study that identifies top priority measures, such top priority measures, might be one option. Importantly, also, although no further cooperation, a scenario without no further cooperation or significant further cooperation will be destructive, it's important to stress that Iraq and Syria can and have to do a lot to use the water they have more wisely. Improve the water governance system in the riparian countries was the fourth intervention area. We looked at the water governance system that is about framework conditions enabling effective water management, including capable institutions, finances, robust policies, and legislation. Several supportive conditions can be identified. For example, all countries have water law and policies in place to manage water and national agencies to implement them. As aforementioned, however, we may agree that the government system is insufficient to deal with looming climate change and other future challenges. Our analysis points to the crucial question of how the countries can essentially grapple with ever greater water challenges in the political, economic, and security context that is becoming less supportive and enabling, except in Turkey perhaps, and in a few other parts of the Basin. Moreover, how can international organizations and donors support environmental NGOs and journalism better that are imperative for raising awareness and spearheading initiatives to improve water security and the state of the environment more largely? These have come under heavy attack more recently across the Middle East. Okay, that's it from my side as an input to the further discussion of today, and I hope it gives you some point to tap into. As I understood, questions for me and about the study will come at the end. So I'm handing over the microphone to whomever is next in presenting or talking. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, dear Müller, Mr. Müller, for your impressive and informative presentation. I saw a lot of things about recommendations and key findings, just like the system dynamics study about the region. According to me, your key findings and recommendations deserve comprehensive discussion, according to me, in Q&A session. We will take all the questions in the last session, and I want to use the time efficiently. And I want to go to the second session, the contribution session, and I want to give the floor, first of all, Dr. Martina Klimes from Stockholm International Water Institute. First of all, I want to introduce her. She is the advisor in Water and Peace and in Scientific Program Committee in Stockholm International Water Institute. Martina Klimes has 15 years of experience working with dialogue facilitation, conflict resolution, political and security analysis, including practical work in the field and informal diplomacy processes. Her main focus is on water diplomacy and water cooperation, climate and security, dialogue facilitation, incentives, and third-party involvement in the negotiation process. Martinez's book, Using Chariots to Bring Peace, Negotiation, and Third-Party Involvement, focuses primarily on the effectiveness of aid conditionally and other external tools that third parties, from states and regional organizations to NGOs, bring to the table in peace negotiations. Martina holds a PhD degree in international relations and is also an associated research fellow at the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm. If it's okay for you, dear Klimes, Dr. Klimes, the floor is yours to share your speech. Thank you, Klimes, for your speech. And dear Müller, you can respond to contributions of the Martina Klimes in the QA session if you want. I want to go to the second discussant in this session. Süha Umar, former ambassador of Turkey in Jordan. I want to introduce him first of all. Ambassador Ahmet Süha Umar served at the Turkish embassy in Buenos Aires as first secretary, consulate general in Burgas, Bulgaria as vice consul general, Turkish permanent representation to the Council of Europe as first consular, NATO and OSCE as deputy permanent representative. He has participated at the Love of the Sea conference as deputy head of the Turkish delegation and as deputy chief negotiator of Turkey in the Treaty on the Conventional Arms in Europe negotiations. He was head of the Turkish delegation of the Middle East Peace Presence, Arms Control, and Regional Security Group. He has served as ambassador of Turkey in Jordan and Serbia and as Director General for Bilateral Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His many articles in Turkish and English on diplomacy, domestic and world politics, and nature conservation have appeared in dailies in Turkey and foreign magazines. Ambassador Umar has 3 published books: Belgrade, 500 Years After, Desert Patrol, Jordan Memoirs, and The Big White Man, Memoirs of a Nature Warrior. I want to give the word to you, Süha Umar, to share your speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Kandemir, and I welcome all the participants. First of all, I'll join my voice in congratulating and commending the report by Andrea Müller and all who have contributed to this report. It was an excellent piece of study. I went through it utmost attention and took a couple of points to mention, first of all, from the report. We all know, as Ms. Klimes mentioned, we all know the situation, we all know the issues and the problems, and we have to focus our attention more into the future than what has happened in the past. Of course, keeping always the past in our minds, so to enlighten our way into the future. Let me first of all mention a couple of facts. World is a habitat and it is a whole. So political or other borders doesn't count. We have to keep this very simple fact in mind. So when we try to tackle with the problems, we have to cooperate and act as a whole. When I said we, I mean the regional countries who are directly involved and interested in the basin we are now discussing, the Euphrates and Tigris Basin. Also, I saw in the report that the basic or the main focusing point is the climate change and its effect, how it will affect the water issue in the basin. And it is said in the report that this is not, at least for the time being, the most urgent issue. Yes, I agree. There are other issues which are more urgent to be tackled with. But as it is also again mentioned in the report, the climate change will have an effect on this issue maybe more in the future. So we have to keep this in mind to be ready to tackle with it, to face this challenge. And it is, I understand that from other issues also, that the climate change is a big issue, and it's going to become even more important an issue which with the whole humankind should have to face. There are a couple of points which I, at least if I may put it that way, maybe I should not say that I disagree, but I have doubts. One of these points is the outside intervention or assistance, whatever you call it, in this issue in the region. The recent past doesn't really make me very happy or very relaxed about this issue, because the outside intervention into this region produced the results that we are not very happy with. Let's say, let's take into consideration one single issue, the conflict prevention or conflict resolution. The outside interference in the region produced totally the contrary. It created more trouble than it solved. Another point which I would like to emphasize is another issue which was raised in the report: restoration of wetlands and marshes. This is important in my opinion, as far as the water issue in the basin is concerned. The wetlands and marshes, those who have prepared this report and who are now attending this webinar know better than myself, is one of the crucial issues or one of the crucial elements in this issue, in the issue of water as general. Another issue which was raised in the report was trust, or we may call it confidence building. Yes, this is important because I will come to the basic point, which is cooperation, which also was mentioned very frequently and emphasized in the report. If you don't have trust or confidence in the other part or other party, it is very difficult to cooperate. So this is a point which was raised in the report very rightly, I may put it that. The issue of cooperation also will depend on the political situation in the region. When it comes to that, I have to emphasize that the situation now is even worse than it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. Unfortunately, the region is in another turmoil. The cooperation which was possible between, let's say, Syria and Turkey in the past, or Syria and Iraq in the past, or Turkey and Iraq again in the past, was more feasible and easier than it is now, due to the the changes in the region, political changes. So a few points related to this issue. Syria and Turkey relations, due to the factors which I will avoid to deal with in order not to take your time, but you all know it. doesn't make at least me very hopeful when it comes to cooperation between Turkey and Syria. The same goes for Iraq and Turkey. But still, we have to try to overcome all these issues and problems. And I will emphasize the need for cooperation, because this is the only way to tackle with the issue or face the challenges before us, including the climate change. Here, I will come to what Ms. Klimes mentioned. Yes, Turkey, from the very start, didn't want outside intervention or third-party intervention in her dealings with the other regional countries as far as the water issue is concerned. There was a reason for that, and the reason was based in most of the cases what I said a couple of minutes ago. The outside intervention did not prove to be very useful. To the contrary. But this may change, of course. And we all know that, as Mr. Müller emphasized it, we need at least outside institutional or state support. Even if all others, if we forget all other issues, the financing of the huge infrastructure projects for this, the whole region, all the countries in the region, including Turkey, will need support. So this is a very tricky issue. It can be very useful or it can be very harmful. This is the reason why we had always been very reserved on this. Again, Ms. Klimes mentioned unofficial get-togethers. Yeah, this is a good idea, because this was also used in the course of the Middle East peace process, and I was one of the persons who have started the second track, we used to call it. This is a useful way of tackling with these kinds of issues. So people, when they are out of their official uniforms, if I may put it that way, official titles, they tend to be more open to discussing issues, and more open to finding solutions, or at least formulating solutions that could be useful for the official bodies to implement. Another point, which I agree with Ms. Klimes, we should not focus only on water. There are other areas where cooperation and acting together may be very, very helpful in solving the water issues also. There was one, if my memory is not failing me, there was, Mr. Yıldız will remember it, there was one such way of cooperation between Iraq and Turkey, if I remember correctly. Cooperation in other field would also reflect positively on the issue of water problems between Iraq and Turkey. But again, if I remember correctly, because of the situation, it was not implemented as so. So my memory, I understand, is correct. Mr. Yıldız just say yes. So now I'll come to my last couple of points. We are all aware of the situation. Just before this meeting, Mr. Yıldız sent me map of Turkey and how things were going in our country as far as the rainfall, snowfall, and the precipitation and all these factors which are related to water issues in the basin. We all know it's a long time now we had been and we are still discussing taking water from the eastern part of Turkey and bring it to the western part of Turkey because we needed water in that part where there was a lack of water. All this kept in mind, I will say, is something which is known to all of you, but I will once again emphasize it. Turkey, being the upriver or the source country of the two main rivers, Euphrates and Tigris, of this basin, may look like doesn't need anybody to deal with this issue. This is not true. In my opinion, Turkey also needs full cooperation of all the regional countries in this basin, just forgetting about all other elements and factors, only to prevent large numbers of people moving from their mainlands to the other countries. Just to stop this, we need this kind of cooperation. Mr. Müller, in the report also, it is repeatedly emphasized, lack of water, fresh water, clean water, may lead to moving large amount of or large number of people from their mainlands to the other countries. This is a huge problem. We know it from the recent Syrian affair, how it affects negatively a country, because we are living through it from the very first days of this conflict. So Turkey needs this cooperation without, of course, giving out or forgetting about her national interests, and all other countries in the basin need this cooperation. So we have to base ourselves on this simple fact that there is only one way of tackling with this issue. This is cooperation, cooperation, and cooperation again. There is no other way. From time to time, people talk about water wars or things. Fighting around or over water will not solve anything. It will make things even worse. There was a reference in the report, if I remember it correctly. War is costlier than cooperating and sharing or whatever other means of tackling with this issue. And this was realized even by Syria, if I remember correctly what it was mentioned in the report in the past. War will be more costly than anything else. So in my opinion, I repeat it whenever I have the opportunity, all the basin countries should always keep in mind that they are the only ones who will solve this problem, face the challenges, and they are the only ones who can do it and should do it. Of course, I repeat, third-party assistance, help in areas where it is needed is welcome, but we should not count on third-party interference or third-party meddling or whatever you call it, because in the past that was not helpful. in the future, it may change. I don't know, of course. So I'm not a soothsayer. I cannot say it, what will happen in the future. But the past told us that we are the ones who should and will be able to solve this problem. This is what I believe, and I hope others will also share this view. I agree on the concept that there are risks and opportunities. Risks are known, and they may make the regional countries believe in cooperation more than ever, because when the risk will become higher and higher, maybe the regional countries in the basin will realize more and more that they have to cooperate with each other. This is one of the basic findings in the report, which I very much liked. I have to say it. The issues are, of course, not easy to solve. Let's take only one of them, the Châtelet and the marshes. When they were destroyed, I understand that they were restored to some extent, but rising sea levels, salinization, and all these issues are big issues, very difficult to tackle with. We all have to be equally attentive and equally ready to cooperate. Again, I repeat, we are not alone. We cannot survive alone. This is what is important. Of course, a lot will depend on the political situation in the region. We may wish to cooperate, but we may not find an interlocutor or the other states ready to it for many reasons. I don't know, for the time being at least, how we can overcome this issue, the problem. But again, I repeat, we should try to overcome, and hopefully we will have the ways, and we will find the ways and means to overcome these difficulties, so that the way to cooperation will be fully open. Maybe I should stop here, and I think I said enough to make my views clear. Again, I repeat, in my opinion, Turkey should be ready to cooperate, and we had always been ready to cooperate. The tripartite committees, and Mr. Dursun will know it better than I do, and other arrangements with Iraq and with Syria. They are already examples of our will to cooperate with the other states in the basin. And we have to keep in mind that things are not going in the positive. Things are going in the negative, unfortunately. This is nature, this is environment, and we cannot control nature. We cannot dominate nature. Humankind will realize one day, I hope, that the human beings are not as clever as they believe they are, and they are not as strong as they believe to dominate and change nature in the direction that way they want to change it. Nature will sooner or later claim what it was its and what it will do, what is necessary. So we have to keep in mind if we want the humankind to survive. Thank you very much for listening. I hope I was able to add a couple of at least points for others to think over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Umar, for your opinions and contributions. And your opinions are so important for us because you are a member of the board of the directors of Hydropolitics Association. And thank you for your speech. I want to go to the last discussant, Dr. Hassan Janabi. And I want to introduce him before his speech. Dr. Hassan Janabi was Ambassador Plenipotentiary and Extraordinary of Iraq of the Republic of Turkey. He was Ambassador, Head of the Department of International Organizations and Conferences, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Baghdad, Iraq. He was Minister of Water Resources in Iraq. Between 2015 and 2016, he was Ambassador, Plenipotentiary and Extraordinary of Iraq to Japan. Between 2014 and 15, he was Ambassador, Head of the Department of Human Rights, Minister of Foreign Affairs in Iraq. Between 2009 and 14, he was Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Iraq to United Nations agencies in Rome. Between 2004 and 2008, he was Senior Advisor to the Minister of Water Resources in Iraq. He was also Senior Hydrologist, Sydney Catchment Authority, and Water Quality Modeler, Sydney Water Corporation. He is a frequent guest speaker in major international and United Nations meetings in the Middle East and beyond, providing insight views on issues related to the human and natural resources development in the region. He is writer and lecturer on socioeconomic development in the Middle East, focusing on food and water security, poverty reduction, rural development, water scarcity, and ecosystem restoration and preservation. If it's okay for you, Dr. Hassan Janabi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Yildiz, for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Kandemir, also for this introduction. And I also would like to relate to what has been said so far by Mr. Andrew, Dr. Martina, and Ambassador Umar. I agree with most of what has been said so far. Of course, this is like, you know, the area where I worked most of the time, and yeah, I was part of discussions with the Turkish side, with the Iranians as well, and it's unfortunate that I cannot say everything that I know in this meeting. Certain things that we need to keep like to ourselves or to our own countries. And also technically, I mean, the presentation by Mr. Müller was really comprehensive. And of course, Dr. Martinez's presentation and her questions, too many questions there to be answered, but it touches on very important issues. We all know that this is, of course, I have like written statements. I don't have formal presentations, and I try to like maneuver because a lot of things has been already said. So we know that this area where this is the area where ancient civilization was established, and mainly due to the plentiful of water in the valley. And in fact, the rise and fall of the historical city-states in Mesopotamia were linked directly to the availability of water or the lack of it. And currently, we are concerned that these major rivers are, are the subject of, in my view, the greatest ever threat. Of course, among the reasons are the climate change, although the report still considers climate change impact is minor, but also, in my view, over control and unsustainable utilization of quota is a real threat. Of course, all this is happening in the absence of implementable bilateral or multilateral agreements for equitable and reasonable use of shared waters. So there's also, observed, and I know for sure that there is some indifference towards the application of the principles of international law in this area. So, of course, this contributes to potential conflicts that should be and could be avoided. Technically, our own, and I think the report also mentioned that, observations indicate the decline of about 25% of rainfall, maybe more or less. There is a little bit of differences in the percentages that I have and the what has been listed in the report. 25% of rainfall and snow cover in the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates River. And also the IPCC estimated a reduction in rainfall and snowfall. And a report I read earlier estimated that reduction between 10 to 60, but as mentioned by Andrew a little while ago, it was between 30 to 40%. Regardless, but it is significant amount of reduction is going to happen in the next few decades. Of course, this translates directly into decline in the inflows of the rivers. So if you couple this with the increased demand on water due to inter area population growth, economic development, and what have you, it leads into unfair access to water. And obviously, it represents a real threat to peace and stability. So the combined effect of climate change and uncoordinated operational mode of control structures, because there is very intensive control structure network in all countries, and they are all operating these structures in an uncoordinated way. So this, of course, also led to an alarming decline in the rate of inflows to Iraq. In the case of the Euphrates, and the numbers are in front of me, this amount to like 40%, 45% of the average annual flow, long-term average flow of the observation has been lost in the case of Iraq. So the direct result of this decrease in the inflows, of course, is the shrinking green cover in Iraq. And this caused, of course, and is causing an expanding of desertification. An average temperature in Baghdad and southern Iraq has risen by at least 2 degrees. I think if we recalculate this, and because this number, like I got it 2 years back, but I think more than 2 degrees Celsius in the past few decades. And we need also to remember that the major discussions during like Paris conference and Glasgow and countries and leaders try to agree on 1.5 to 2 degrees by the end of the century or mid of the century. But we already in Iraq passed this. We already had this increase in surface temperature more than 2 degrees Celsius. So this means, and I say that because now after retirement, I am trying to become a farmer. So I am facing this water issue and energy issue myself. I mean, some of my friends in this meeting probably also monitor or read my Facebook, and I put some of the stuff in that. So this increase in the Earth's temperature causes a 20% reduction in agriculture productivity of Iraqi soil, minimum. And now, currently, 90% of Iraq's soil that has been historically the most fertile, with abundance of water, is affected or threatened by desertification. That's 90%. This is a very frightening figure. 2 months ago, the government of Iraq undertook a drastic measure in response to the diminishing water resources by reducing the cultivated lands by 50% for this year. The declining rainfall and unsustainable use of water resources exacerbate the problem of water scarcity, of course, causing progressive depletion of life-sustaining land resources. And of course, it forces migration. UN statistics on the number of displaced persons and migrants for socio-economic reasons are frightening, to say the least. Poverty, war, instability, and the lack of decent means of living resulting from the spread of desertification and loss of biological diversity are the main reason behind this mass migration from some Middle Eastern countries, including my own country, Iraq. Depletion of water resources destroy the fertility of soil. So an impoverished rural population, 30%, I mean, there is some figure also in the report regarding the population, at least 30%, 35% in Iraq, and they are becoming incapable to adapt to water scarcity and other related hardships. The displacement becomes the only option for most of them, regardless of the tragic consequences of this forced migration. Displacement of rural population, usually they are the food producers, causes a double loss, a decrease in the number of food producers on one hand, and an increase in the number of food insecure population on the other. Another tragic example of serious deterioration in the environment in Iraq is the Iraqi delta at the mouth of the Gulf, and Ambassador Umar touched on this. It is a striking example of the destruction of a freshwater ecology characterized by the fertility of soil, the dense forest of palm trees. We're talking about millions, at least 20 million palm trees used to be in Basra area, that have turned into lifeless environments due to advancing seawater damaging an ecosystem that had lasted for thousands of years. And that advancement of seawater front is mainly due to diminishing freshwater inflows into Shatt al-Arab that historically used to come from the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Karkha River in Iran, and Karun River, the two major rivers that originates in Iran. They used to discharge directly, uninterrupted discharge of at least 20 billion cubic meters per annum directly into Shatt al-Arab. Now this has become zero inflows to Shatt al-Arab. At the confluence of the great rivers in Mesopotamia at the mouth of the Gulf, the marshland of Iraq existed for thousands of years. This is also touched upon by Ambassador Umar, covering an area of 15,000 square kilometers. In the face of the current water scarcity and unprecedented heat waves, this World Heritage Site is diminishing. Its indigenous population will be tragically scattered, if not completely disappear. There is also the destruction caused by the terrorist organization Daesh and the damage inflicted on the people and on water installation in particular. Daesh, in fact, weaponized water and used it in the most horrific way, flooding selected areas, destroying hydraulic structures, occupying dams and reservoirs, and so on. And of course, terrorism is thriving on instability, economic and social fragility. The latter contribute to the spread of extremism, vengeance, and revenge. Rising temperature of Earth's surface is a direct threat to human life. It also magnifies the threats of other familiar risks by increasing their complexity and intensity in many regions, obviously including our region in the Middle East, leading to further impoverishment, displacement, food and water insecurity, and violence of human rights, creating situations of instability and conflict. The need for regional approach to minimize the climate change impact on water availability is vital. It must be based on cooperation and understanding the needs of every riparian country. Unilateral actions on the utilization of shared water creates undesirable conditions leading to mistrust and justifiable concern, particularly downstream. There are some good signs of technical cooperation between Iraq and Turkey, and I myself contributed to this track, and I'm happy with my record on this advancement. But it needs to be further enhanced and institutionalized. A 12-year draft of Memorandum of Understanding on Water between the two countries has finally been approved and now is effective. It is promising. It is a promising start that needs to be further advanced beyond technical cooperation. This was also emphasized by Dr. Klimes in her presentation. Iraq-Iran water relations have not progressed. In fact, it has worsened despite the validity of the 1975 Algiers Accord between the two countries, which included specific paragraphs addressing the water issues clearly. Nearly all tributaries originating in Iran and flowing to Iraq have now been brought under extensive network of dams and control structures inside Iran, leaving Iraq in an extremely vulnerable situation. Iran, in particular, showed noticeable disregard towards Iraq's claim. Back in July 2018, I was honored to speak to the Security Council during its unprecedented deliberations on climate-related security risks. It was an important step forward by the UN in addressing the new challenges, reducing risks, and avoiding potential national, regional, and international conflicts. Further efforts are needed to address this subject, obviously. There are so many challenges facing our region. Most of them are transboundary. Unless the response are regionally coordinated, those challenges will be harder to overcome. Obviously, national water strategies are prerequisite for any successful development plan. But transboundary problems require transboundary coordination. Transboundary water must be utilized sustainably. Every upstream country can control the water. You just build dams and reservoirs and divert water and build structures. So everybody can do that, but it has to be utilized sustainably. Embarking on establishing more and more control structure is not a solution. particularly under the prevailing and projected hydrological conditions in the Euphrates and Tigris rivers and tributaries. The region needs smart water policies. The region needs smart water resources policies and programs based on respect for the environment and aiming at achieving stability and peace. Looking from, like, I don't know if I can say from like an eagle eye into the basin, I can see that Iraq, because of the prevailing conditions, political security and the occupation and what have you, Iraq seems to be the weakest link in this, and it is just unfortunate. So in addition to all these problems that we are facing, Iraq is the most downstream country. And so you cannot, in this case, make like proactive policies and programs, except, trying to agree with neighboring countries, trying to raise the awareness of neighboring countries as to the impact of their actions and programs downstream. Because we need also to remember that this water in the Tigris and Euphrates and tributaries, the entire water over thousands of years used to come to Iraq uninterrupted. And now every drop in the basin is controlled. Every single drop virtually. So this cannot, this is not an easy on a nation that is struggling with its own sovereignty and independence, like in these conditions. So these need to be taken into account, and I probably would mention, although it is not in a form of discussion with the ambassador, I think the issues of like third-party facilitator. This is not an intervention in internal affairs of the region. We support the presence of United Nations, any other like neutral scientific organizations, the good wishers organizations to facilitate, meetings between technical people, whatever you call it, track 2 or track 1 or things like that. I don't see this as intervention in our own affairs. It's very helpful. Although the channels between Iraq and Turkey, for example, are open, and this is good. But also we need to, from my own experience, for example, I met with the former Minister of Forestry, Professor Faisal Oroglu. I met when I was a minister. In 1 year or 1.5 years, I met him like 5 times. And during these 5, of course, I went to Ankara. He never visited Iraq then, but it's not a big deal. Of course, it would be good and lovely to have a Turkish minister discussing water like in Baghdad. And I noticed myself and really sharp increase in the understanding that this gentleman had on Iraqi issues, and he became very open. And as usual, I discuss very honestly and openly with my Turkish counterpart things that I cannot say like in this meeting. But I'm happy with the level of technical cooperation that I wanted this to go further into a long-term agreement. I also appreciate that bilateral agreement is more important than any other thing, more important than the principles of international law. But these bilateral agreements or cooperation needs to be based on international law principles. We cannot just, use upper hand, lower hand approach to the issue. It has to be on an equal basis, and also the principles of cooperation needs to be clear. I think I will stop here and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janabi, for your opinions and for your speech. According to me, it was so important and significant for all participants, your opinions and contributions. Before the QA session, I want to additional time to Mr. Komeyer, give some time. Komeyer, can you hear me? Mr.
Yes,
Komeyer?
I hear you. I hear you, Dr. Kandemir. Thank you so much.
Mr. Komeyer, a vice chair from UNESCO, and floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kandemir. I would like also to thank Dr. Dursin for inviting me to this highly important webinar. And I would like to state that throughout my academic and professional life as a water expert and water diplomat, I have seen how much water too often has become an element of cooperation. And in the MENA region, cooperation is central to all riparian countries and a mandatory condition for the riparian countries' well-being and environmental sustainability. The challenges are so heavy, and the challenges on the Tigris and Euphrates Basin were presented by André Müller, a very, very prominent expert. And then I have also recorded some of the very important statement that the prominent expert has said, and I will comment on them in 3 minutes without taking a lot of your time. Dr. Martina Klimes, prominent water expert, said, how can we make it happen about cooperation? His Excellency Dr. Umar said that we cannot survive alone on the Tigris and Euphrates Basin. And His Excellency Dr. Janabi, my great friend, talked about unsustainable use of water, and the non-application of the international law can endanger cooperation. And this is very, very important. So I can state by telling a message with 3 components. The first component is that the riparian countries in the Tigris and Euphrates, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, are already living a water and a nexus crisis. It's not only a water, but a water, an energy, and a food ecosystem nexus crisis. And if this will continue without taking action on both basins by implementing hydrodiplomacy and the nexus concept, we will have to face serious problems. The second message, it will be a little bit long than the first message, is that the water crisis on the Tigris and Euphrates, with its multidimensional aspect, could be addressed through the adoption of new priorities, such as the one which has been defined by UNESCO IHP when I was a chair of UNESCO IHP within the strategy number 9, which was adopted under my mandate, and now as a vice chair representing the Arab region, we have said that we need to implement scientific research and innovation. It's a part that Martina has also covered. We need to highlight water education. We need to bridge the data knowledge gap, and we need to apply inclusive water management under global changes. And we need, of course, good governance, but this time the good governance should be based on science for mitigation and adaptation and resilience. Why resilience? Because we will be encountering extreme events on the Tigris and Euphrates. So the policy that we need to address is very important, and we need to apply is very important, which should be based in improving water governance and regional cooperation based on the nexus concept, the nexus of water, energy, food, and ecosystem. And the last message that I would like to give is that within the IHP UNESCO, under my mandate, we have voted a very important resolution. And the three countries which are represented at the UNESCO Council, Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, has voted the resolution that I have personally presented, which is the creation of the ECOMED Academy. And here comes the answer to Martina, how we can make it happen. This is a new initiative for IHP by creating the ECOMED Academy, and this academy will highlight a regional platform to facilitate riparian knowledge based on development, information exchange, and experience sharing for climate impact adaptation strategies. So I invite you, the three countries, to join the UNESCO IHP ECOMED Academy, which has been a MENA platform in order to highlight all the problems and start working together in order to achieve water security, climate resilience for the future generation, as Dr. Dersin has highlighted in his opening speech. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Komer, for your clear speech and message. I think that this webinar is not just like the webinar, just like the kind roundtable meeting. And now I started the QA session. I have some opinions in the chat area, but first of all, we can start the discussion with the participants if you want.
Say something.
Okay, Mr. Yıldız.
Dr. Fadi, thank you very much for your approach. It is very clear and very useful for the future of the region.
Now, think only on transboundary water, on the water as a bulk. We should couple it to the energy, and both are highly vital in order to sustain the economy of the basin. And this is how we should manage the basin of transboundary, whereas it is Tigris, Euphrates, or Jordan River Basin, or the Nile River Basin. Based on that, each country needs the energy, each country needs the water for the food, and each country needs to abide by the ecosystem preservation also. So without the nexus approach, we won't be able to build cooperation and hydro diplomacy. And this is what I advise you to. Our next Senate conference, it will be on next October on the Himalayan basins, where the concept of nexus will be important to highlight in order to launch cooperation on the Himalayan basin.
Thank you so much again, from beginning to the end of the webinar.
Thank you very much for everybody, including our contributors, Dr. Fulya Kandemir. Thank you, and see you again for the next meeting related with this very sensitive region of this geography.